Welcome to the London International Mime Festival 2021 online. Things were a little different this year, and we welcome Sean Gandini to talk about his work. There are two of his shows that you can see on the Mime Festival YouTube channel this year. There is the special edition of Smashed, which I think was the fourth iteration of this show, the third one indoors, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then the 2019 premiere of Spring, which was a collaboration with Sadler's Wells New Wave associate Alexander Whitley. And both of these versions also had live musicians and guest artists, and really in a way represent the kind of the culmination of two parts of the Gandini work, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. I'm Thomas Wilson, I'm your host, and I have in fact written a book on Gandini Juggling, which I think is still available via their website, which looks at the history of the company. But enough of that, let's talk about Gandini Juggling. Maybe Sean, for those who are finding us for the first time, finding you for the first time, how would you describe what it is that Gandini Juggling does? What do you do?
So we make shows, mostly, that's the main. We do a number of other things, but mostly we make shows that have a juggling element at its center. The kind of the atomic element of our shows is juggling in all its forms. I've realized during lockdown, I work with my partner, Kati Ylä-Hokkala, and we work quite closely, and most works are co-signed by both of us. And we both realized in lockdown quite how much we adore juggling and all its endless permutations. And so we've made about 30 shows, 31-hour shows, and a number of smaller things that just look at juggling in a whole different variety of ways.
And I guess, I think what interested me and brought me to the company all those years ago, because you've been going over 30 years now, I think, or at least
yes,
30
yeah,
years.
30, yeah.
Is the fact that you seem to be very happy moving into dance, moving into a theatrical world, sometimes just dealing with what people might call pure juggling. Sometimes it's about the architecture of space. Sometimes it's about the humanness in juggling. What is it that prompted you to say, well, okay, I'm happy with juggling, but I want to go and see these other parts. I want to see what happens when you bring these other things together.
Well, I think for me, even though I absolutely adore juggling, I also very much enjoy making things. The pleasure of constructing, the pleasure of choreographing, the pleasure of structure. And juggling is sometimes, juggling flirts so well with other art forms and other complicated structures that why not? And I realize I'm sometimes jealous. There's a kind of artist that sticks to one idea and has that thread, you know, the person that just puts shoes in the middle of a room. And sometimes I'm jealous of those people. What do you do? And I put shoes in the middle of the room, and every couple of years they'll change the style of shoes. And I feel like we are much more grasshopper artists. So we're very happy to explore all manner of things, and we can do huge U-turns. And I think we just really enjoy the journey, and we're curious about the world. So we'll encounter a new form of dance, and one of the first things that we think is, wow, what would happen if you put juggling on that, or how does that apply to juggling? Yeah.
I guess that's interesting because in a way you've also never quite left also the more kind of, I guess, a kind of classical juggling world of just throwing objects for fun and seeing what's possible with objects, and that can be to a juggling audience, but equally a number of your works have been very popular works, outdoor works, very accessible works. And there's something I think that's interesting in Smashed that starts to maybe bring that popular, maybe it started as a popular piece, but became much darker.
Well, actually, in my mind, Smashed was a dark piece. And in fact, I did a conversation a few days ago about another of our pieces called Clowns and Queens that maybe we could touch upon, and where I was saying to somebody that I made it partly in reaction to the fact that I felt that Smashed had been received in a different way to what I expected. But then with time, I've realized that that was my preconceptions and not the audience. But when we made Smashed very, very quickly. as a commission from Angus McKishney on from the who at the time was running a beautiful outdoor festival in front of the National Theatre in London. And he, for a number of years, gave us this amazing carte blanche. Do what you wish. Isn't that every artist's dream? The no strings attached commission. And Pina Bausch had just died, and we thought we would make a little something based around the idea of what if Pina Bausch had choreographed juggling, or how would her world inform ours? And at the same time, it was an anniversary of Isaac Newton, and a conversation we'd had with another outdoor producer, Bradley Hemmings, who we talked about making a piece based on apples. So these various ideas came together, and we decided to restrict the show just on apples. But one of the things at the back of my mind was this dark universe. There's two images in Pina's work. One is the lonely woman surrounded by men, which is a very disturbing image, and has taken on an extra layer of meaning in today's Me Too world. And for me, it was always, there was nothing funny about that image. And with time, I've come to realize that you can do dark via funny. And in fact, some of the best dark is done via funny. But when we first presented the show and we did it outdoors, I couldn't understand why people were laughing at these horrendous things. And then bizarrely, I feel like Smash has got darker, but also much funnier. It's become, people talk about it as a funny show. And I think the funniness has somehow crept in. It's one of the rare shows we've done it about 700 times. So it just lives on its own. I don't feel like we almost don't have control of it anymore. It's a bit like the virus evolving. Every few shows, something mutates in the show. In fact, yeah, that's a good metaphor, the Darwinian evolution of shows. Yeah.
I guess there's so much in that to come back to. And I guess partly is, then this interest, to start from Isaac Newton and the image of the apple dropping, and that hints to an element of the interest, I guess, of science and physics, and that has a very natural home in juggling, but also often, I think, in a lot of arts, that interest in what's going on over there in the sciences and how do we pull on that. But also, excuse me, also something about the way in which you started from the Bausch. Was it starting from an image, the idea, you talk about this image and the images of Bausch, and there's kind of these, I guess, the choreographic motifs, the line, the repetition
yes.
of action.
Yes.
And then there's also, I guess, those formal parts. And then there's also the part of Bausch that is about how humans behave to other humans.
Actually, what you say is exactly right. It was a series of images. Actually, the image I had the most in my mind is what you call the line that we call the parade, which is that moving very, very gracefully, and it normally has a little hand gesture. That actually, because we made this show quite quickly, some of the things that I've learned about Pina, I have learned in retrospect. And in fact, somebody wrote this beautiful MA on the relationship between Smash and Pina's work, and they draw conclusions of scenes which are related, but I had never seen those scenes. So I think it's partly, I guess, in Pina's credit that I feel like some of these monumental artists, whatever you do, they have done before. I'm working on, we are working on some Cunningham inspired material at the moment, and it's the same thing. Anything you think of choreographically, somebody goes, yeah, Merce did that in 56. But returning to Pina, so there's that parade, the line, and bizarrely, it's such a simple thing that opens the show, and yet I had tried for a few years before to do it, and I never had the right team of people, and fortunately, when we made Smash, the right team of people were there that we could make it quickly. It's one of those things where sometimes doing the simple well is as hard as doing the difficult well.
That's interesting, isn't it? I think we'll come to that in a second. I think just reflecting on this idea of, I guess, the greats and how their work, there's something maybe inherent in a particular formal arrangement or device or way of working that carries not just the form, but also the impact or the intention of the work. And it seems like, if we do borrow these forms from people, you also have to take what that form means to that artist, and it comes into your work regardless. In a way, I guess partly me saying the form is, the medium is the message, the form is the content.
Yes, and then you get into some very complicated things when you are channeling another artist. If you channel something that's sufficiently back in time, say you rewrite a Vivaldi, I feel like it's a different process to somebody who's still hovering as such a close to us cultural entity as Pina Bausch or Merce Cunningham. And so then you also, I feel like you need to respect the form, but you have the very tricky thing of creating something that's both genuine to the person, but is not a parody or a cliche, which for me with Smash was such a tremendous worry. I had at the back of my mind this, because it was made so quickly and it was never meant to live. We never asked the Pina Foundation whether we could do this. And so as the show kept going, I kept thinking, I mean, we sent them emails and they knew of the existence of the work, but somebody would turn up and say, what are you doing? And at which point, obviously, we would have shut the show down. And so we had exactly that with Dominique Merci, who I have the utmost admiration and is such a beautiful, beautiful artist. And we were doing a show, I can't remember the name of the festival in Paris, this beautiful festival in Paris. It was 10 days, and we're doing shows around outdoors in Paris. And we start doing a show, and there's quite a humble looking man with a plastic bag of shopping. And as we do the parade, it's very easy to look out into the audience, and I see Dominique Merci.
Who is, of course, one of Pina Bausch's most well-known collaborators, performers, and really, I guess, one of the holders of her legacy these days.
Absolutely, and is in all the seminal works from Café Müller to The Rite of Spring. I mean, just yes, and I think was very close to her in discussions about how the work was made. So in a way, it was almost like having Pina out there watching. And I thought, my God, this might be the day. This might be the last Smash you do. Maybe at the end of it, he goes, look, what was that? Maybe he doesn't even talk to us. And then I could see his smile getting bigger as the show went on. And then I had this sense of joy. And then he came to talk to us, and he was the most wondrous man. He said that kind of thing that, in a way, is incredibly frustrating to hear when you're in a given marginal art form, but also is often meant as a compliment, which is, I didn't think that juggling could possibly work with Pina Bausch. And I know magicians get this, or acrobats. I didn't think I liked juggling, or I don't normally like juggling, but I like, yeah. So then we began
to work with you on the special edition, didn't we?
Yeah.
To give you a little bit of support. And you'd had obviously dramaturgs working with it before, because I guess part of the way you work is very collaboratively, and I'd like to talk a bit more about that later. But I guess here is the collaboration with someone who knows the things you're riffing with.
To remix Smash for Helen and Joseph from the Mime Festival asked us if we would put together a special version of Smash, because Smash, I think Smash might be the only piece to have played 3 times at the Mime Festival. And so we opened the 40th anniversary. And because of Smash's success, there was often 2 teams performing the show at the same time. So I think we have about 30 people who have performed a version of Smash. And the idea was to bring as many of them together. And I sent Dominic an email saying, will you come? And he was very, he is the most humble of people. And he said, well, I don't know if I can help, but if you want me in the room. And so we had 3 days or 4 days, I can't remember exactly, with Dominic, watching things and feeding in. And yeah, sometimes life delivers these special moments, because to have made a tribute to Pina Bausch and end up working on it with Dominic Merci is just kind of heaven.
What were his gems of his pearls of wisdom that he delivered?
Actually, he was very much, I would often, because I had this anxiety of having him there. So I would go, does this work? And he would go, I don't know. Let's see. Let's let it live. So he was very, actually, he trusted things and let them be. And I know that we added a new scene, which is a scene I really like, which is based on a Charles Aznavour scene. In the classic indoor Smashed, there's only 2 women and 7 men. And all of a sudden we had the dilemma that in the larger Smash, we had more women, but something about the volume of men versus the women is what works in Smashed 1. And so we have this little surreal scene about halfway through where more women appear, and they do this Charles Aznavour song about a man in that kind of I don't know exactly when this song is from, maybe 60s, 70s, the transvestites of the time, that men who dressed up as women and performed in Paris. And it's my mum and I, we live alone, a small apartment is our home. And I think Dominic wasn't sure about this scene. And there's Lynn, who's a wonderful juggler and performer who works with us, carries the piece, and it was really on her shoulders. And I think when we did it at Peacock, part of the Sadler's Wells, Lynn sat on a chair, and she said it was quite nerve-wracking because it was just me and Dominic sitting in the room kind of judging this scene. And Dominic went, oh yes, okay, this is right. So he lets things grow and trusts intuition. And I guess that's something else that's quite an interesting thought, which I'm having a lot working on Merce Cunningham's extraordinary legacy and choreography, was how much you go into the studio with things prepared, which Merce did. And I find that absolutely astounding and mind-blowing. And I think that Pina would pre-prepare, but also play, and which is more how we work. You test things, you have an idea, but then that conversation with the artist in the room can modify and completely transfigure that idea.
But there is a sense that to some extent you do go into a room with a backup of pattern and motif and a kind of vocabulary you already have, and you may not have decided how the vocabulary is going to be spoken in a particular moment, but there's that I guess it's like a classical dance. There's a vocabulary that sits under everything you do.
Yes, and the more you make, the more you have a cupboard full of, for us, it's juggling patterns. And we are, one of the things that this lockdown has been for us is we've made so many patterns. In fact, I struggle with my archiving of, this is one with 4 rings, this is one with 7 clubs, this is one with this is one with this. And it's partly stuff that we're making with the idea of the Cunningham piece that's coming up. But yeah, and I mean, in some ways, I think that's also an imprisonment, in the same way that as you grow older, you carry a psychological luggage, that it's both a blessing because you have all of these things that you can go back to, but there's a danger that you always go back to the same things and the same ways. And I guess one of the challenges as artists who have made things for a number of years is to try and break the pattern, that people don't go, geez, the Gandinis are doing what the Gandinis always do.
That's interesting, I think, particularly in relation to Spring, which is I guess not the end, but a marker point in the line of the investigation of work with dance that began right back in the 1990s with the work with I guess seminal choreographic voice Jill Clark, and then found its way through various small scale iterations through the 90s, and then I guess the noughties, and then into your sequence of 3, I guess, bigger works, with 4x4 with the Royal Opera House, Sigma, and then of course Spring. And so I guess is there something about going to different dance forms that is about you trying to refresh and review what you know, so you're avoiding that sense of an artist who just repeats what they always do?
I think that what you say, as always, Thomas, is very right. I think that is exactly the crux of it. But I don't think we articulate it as that. I think we get seduced by an art form, or sometimes it's something that's been going around your mind for years. Like, for example, I keep going back because it's where my mind's at the moment, to the Cunningham that we're making at the moment, that we've watched Cunningham for so long and got exhilarated. And I think both Kati and I, when we watch things, we can't help to think, what would that be in juggling? But you're right. I mean, the work we did with Jill, I think, just feeds everything we do. Even when we go very far from it, I still feel like there's, like Smash for me, I think we made it whilst Jill was still alive. But in the back of my head, I was thinking, my God, Jill would hate this. And yet there's a lot of still, like we do a duet, Kati and I, in the later version of Smash, that is coming straight out of Jill Clarke's ideas.
Those who haven't seen it, that early work was essentially about just pulling juggling apart and interrupting and breaking and fragmenting and really trying to, certainly that's the view I got of what Jill was doing when I first met. It was, oh, here she is, and she's actually breaking juggling to see what's possible.
I think she was definitely deconstructing, and they were very incredibly experimental works in terms of, if one puts it, if what we do is circus, for want of a label, at the time they were made, there was virtually nothing that was getting into the structure of circus and really pulling that apart. So I think Jill, in that sense, Jill's input on our company was quite visionary, I would say. But they weren't easy pieces, and we certainly struggled. We were stubborn, so we kept going, but we struggled with getting enough people to understand them. But they still inform what we do, as I said a moment ago. And that obsession with structure and taking it apart is a constancy almost every day, yeah.
So maybe we should talk then about, I guess, in relation to Spring, where did Spring start, other than it's time to have a look at contemporary dance, having done ballet and Bharatanatyam. What was the motivating question?
So it was, as you mentioned earlier, the third part of this trilogy. I mean, in a way, it's weird because I felt like the trilogy would close this relationship with juggling and dance, and actually we're now involved in this huge juggling dance thing. But I call them Tinder dates. So it was kind of juggling goes on Tinder dates with these sophisticated dance forms in a way that was different. What I would say is different from the work we did with Jill is that in that we thought juggling is dance and let's mess with it. Whereas in this trilogy, we said our juggling is whatever it is, and it's going to talk to this other art form. And so, as you mentioned, we did classical ballet in 4x4 ephemeral architectures, which was looking a little bit at inventing a classicism for juggling. What if juggling had the illustrious history of ballet? So there was somebody like Louis XIV who loved juggling so much that the world was peppered with these juggling houses. And so a kind of reverse science fiction. And then we did the classical Indian dance form of Bharatanatyam. We worked with Sita Patel. And that was more looking at rhythm and the segmenting of things into smaller and smaller parts. And then actually the journey with Alexander Whitley, whose a choreography I find quite extraordinary. Initially, we wanted to make a rite of spring. So it was this kind of like, it feels like this other monument, and how would we do it? And so we'd seen a piece that Alex made on Rambert, I think it's called Frames, where Alex, I don't know how many, but it feels like 100. He's got 100 frames that get constructed and deconstructed, and it's a phenomenally structural piece. And I'd also seen a trio that Alex did at Sadler's Wells, has oyster in the titles, and it reminded me very much of Jill Clarke. And so we asked Alex if he'd be interested. We had a little meeting with Alex, and then Alex came back to us saying, "I'd love to work with you, but I don't want to do the Rite of Spring." And so then I think the journey went on a more formalist, but I think it's we had the most time. So I feel like it's the deepest we've gone back into dance and juggling. And it's the most we both got pushed off our course. So we ended up with a show that's very different to something we would have made on our own. And he ended up with something that he definitely wouldn't have made on his own. And I guess that's the best collaboration, is when the collaborator knocks you off your course. Yeah.
And so I guess having spoken, I get a bit about Dominique Mercy's approach, which is to let just things live and let things play, which I think is really part of Smashed's mode, is a sense of playfulness. What did Alexander bring to it?
So at first, for the first couple of weeks, he was very polite, and I think he was maybe intrigued at how we worked. I think because he will stay on an idea and really drill it and refine it, whereas we tend to, especially at the beginning of a process, sketch a lot of things. Try this, try that, try this, try that, try this, try that, and then go back and add the dots and the detail later. And so I think he was a little bit intrigued about how we did that. But he was also had a wonderful curiosity for the movement of juggling. And he had that right from the beginning, like, how can I throw this differently? He's an extremely physical man. So, and actually I loved watching him just throw himself in. He grabbed the prop straight away, which I felt like, how do I throw that? Can I hold it in a different way? Can I, and then little bit by little bit, as we got to know each other, he was more present in the studio. And I learned so much from he's such a great choreographic maker. I am always, I think I have, somewhere deep down, I yearn to be, to choreograph more. I love watching good choreographers work, because they have it, it's like they have it inside them. There's this great intuition. But yeah, so then there was this bouncing backwards and forwards, and kind of, I guess some people would say that Alex's work is quite serious. And I think that the work ended up being a collaboration from us being the light-hearted person in the room, and Alex being the more serious, with obviously both of us taking other roles. But I know that, I mean, there's a couple of scenes which we cut from the show, which I regret. There's a scene which I should put up on video if the performers had let me, where one of the performers comes up and says, my hands are so small. My hands are too small. I can't juggle. And then another performer comes and says, my hands are so big. And I just love that scene. But for some reason, something happened that both Alex and some of the performers didn't want that scene in. And so but there was a battle over some scenes, and I was a bit naughty. There's a little cheerleading scene that I added in a venue where Alex couldn't come, because I felt like the piece needed a way in for the viewer, that if not, it just became dense, because it's really dense and complicated. It's one of the most complicated things we've done.
This is really interesting, because maybe there's a little bit of you that is still out in the street, juggling back, you know, as you started out in Covent Garden, juggling for the punters as they come by.
But you know, that is so true. I do feel like somewhere deep down, ironically, when I was doing street shows in Covent Garden, I was the serious one. And I'm sure the others, they mocked me like, oh, Jesus, Sean's doing street shows to Chopin. Like, what the hell is he doing? But then as we've traveled down the road, I feel like I'm the light-hearted, the street performer. In fact, Kati says to me sometimes when we're talking about how to finish a show, I feel like I always, even though it might be an experimental boom, I do feel like you need to put the boom at the end. And Kati often says to me, that is so circus. Why are you? So even though I'm often saying, no, we're not circus and we're moving away from that way, maybe somewhere. And I think she also has an element of that, of putting the little drop line in, or the little comedy. Yeah.
I guess there's something about the rhythm of pieces, isn't there? The rhythm of a popular piece has a certain crescendo and a certain rhythm, and then again, you know, thinking back to the work with Jill, that had a very different rhythm that was almost
that didn't
antithetical to that.
And
then you see in Smashed, there's a really clear dramatic arc and sense of moments of events that punctuate what's happening.
And I mean, the end of Smashed has got the boom. And in fact, when we made Smashed 2, Kati and I had many conversations, because I wanted a different kind of boom. And Kati actually suggested that it end on this kind of slow motion violence, which I think she was very right in suggesting. But again, you could argue that that's a quiet boom. It's a firework that doesn't go off in the right way, but it's still a firework.
But I guess most art has to go somewhere. There's
Yes.
a point where it has to end at something, and land at something.
And if you finish quietly, you're referencing the fact that people know that most people finish loudly, and you go, wasn't that clever? They finished quietly when most people. So I guess there's all kinds of complicated. The beginnings.
It's a circus surprise, isn't it? It's like, oh, whoops, you didn't think I was going to do that, but here I am. I'm going to do this.
I mean, beginnings are even more tricky, I think, because there's a few things. I had a show that we mentioned briefly at the beginning, Clowns and Queens. It's not necessarily on our agenda today to talk to, but I had set myself the goal of starting with difficulty, not doing this. Smash opens with his beautiful seductive parade, which in a way is perfect because you get to look at the audience and you say to the audience, welcome, come inside, something nice is going to happen. And in a way, it's a fake promise, a complicity that you set up. For me, it's always been intriguing. How do you break that rule? Is it possible to begin in a way that's not that? And I must say that I've always fought it. I know Romeo Castellucci in Inferno has this scene of a man with the 5 dogs. And I feel like he was successful in doing that. But certainly there are rules that are very difficult. And if you break them in a way, the audience is almost knowing the rules and thinking you've broken that rule. I think it's Jonathan Burrows who says that an audience will trust you for about 4 minutes. Will kind of go, oh, I don't know about this, let me see. But then there's a moment when they're watching that they make a decision. And in a way, especially if you're wanting to present difficult concepts or mess with a given form, if you can seduce the audience at the beginning, it's easier to then go, but
we're back to outdoor performance, aren't we? And we're back to this idea that actually most of an outdoor performance is the patter. It's not what you're actually doing. It's true. It's true. It to an audience.
True. It's
and
true.
You could, and I remember seeing back in the 90s, people in the Covent Garden he would do literally, they'd only do a 5-ball cascade. That would be their highlight. Mm-hmm. And once you've seen a bit of juggling, you go, okay, it's difficult, but it's, for you guys, it's kind of a baseline entry point. But they're entertaining because of all the work they do around it.
Yes, but ironically, I used to find that very frustrating at the time because I loved juggling, and my using of the street medium for performing was an excuse to show the juggling as opposed to an interest in the form itself, which over the years I have grown to like and I have learned so much from, and I realized what an invaluable school having been there was. But then going back to spring, the conversation with Alex, or the balancing act, was me wanting to put in those moments. I guess there's also the punctuations, which I guess you could see as classical clowning, the punctuations that let the audience in, and which I certainly have felt that some very pure dance people are very resistant of. Why are you lightening this form? And I think there's a sacredness around certain, when art forms become classical, there's a sacredness of the space that you shouldn't mess with it. Like you shouldn't have this in an art gallery, or ballet shouldn't have this. And the hierarchy of the arts as well, that certainly in the cultural hierarchy of the arts, dance is higher than circus. But it's a perception, because it's just cultural history.
Historically, circus has always been the art form that's always riffed off things and said, oh, okay, we know that's going on in high culture. Well, I'm going to use that in whatever theme or whatever way I'm playing my act.
I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, I mean, there's a much more complex discussion to be had on defining circus. And I always feel like circus is a random 27 skills that have been put into a pot. But you're right, circus riffs. And I felt we needed a circus fix over this holiday. So we've been watching old Monte Carlo circus festivals. Oh, wow. And there's a recent trend in Russian circus, which is literally they'll take something and just boom, culturally put it on. Like it can be anything from Mozart 17th century costumes to and I think circus has no qualms about just we'll use that, or we'll I mean, in a sense, it's quite a brutal art form. Yeah.
I guess because at the end of it, circus is a commercial art form. It's only recently in the UK, certainly, it's had any kind of I guess subsidized funding, and it was always very much you're over there and you're over there in the commercial sphere, and then all these kind of subsidized arts are over here. And so I guess it has had to be a little bit more brutal and taking advantage of things.
But it's also such an extraordinarily great art form. I mean, one of the things that us experimentalists, I question is circus works. It's perfect. It kind of bam, 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 crescendo. It gives you the big trick. It has sex. It has death. I mean, it relates to Greek tragedy. So why are we messing with it? What on earth are we thinking?
Popcorn at the same time.
You have popcorn, absolutely. There's animals. Sometimes that's a whole other. Let me just see. Sorry.
Area. So I want to come back to this idea of the people, because I guess in the classical circus is about bringing lots of people together with their skills, and then the job of the ringmaster or whoever is running the circus is to populate the acts, populate the show with those people, and then while whoever's then you might have somebody who's a high wire act, but they're probably also doing 3 or 4 other things that you don't see or you might see in the show. So I guess let's talk a bit about how who you work with, what you look for, and how also, I guess, how you've developed or given space for certain people to develop as jugglers and performers, I guess, within your core team.
Well, actually, one thing I have realized over the last couple of years is that we give people space to grow if they want to. So, for example, at the moment, there's a wonderful dancer called Jennifer Gogans who was in the final Cunningham company and who helped us with our initial opening the door to the Cunningham universe. She works for the Cunningham Trust, but we taught her to juggle a year ago, and she's learning so much juggling. So we're having these weekly to and fro conversations, and we send her juggling patterns and she learns them. And a couple of the Alexander Whitley dancers, Yuxian Wu and Tia Hockley, have both learned quite a lot. And Erin O'Toole, who was in 4x4, was one of the ballerinas in 4x4 and has been in 3 or 4 pieces since, and has become quite a core part of what we're doing. So I guess if people are interested, we love this idea that we can give them our world and they can grow within our world, and then they feed back in stuff to our world. Like, for example, Sakari Manisto, who is a beautiful Finnish juggler, quite an inventive, has fed patterns into the company, and these patterns stay and get mutated. So even though I guess we're an autocratic company and that it is run by Kati and I do feel like we're quite prolific collaborators, and we let people in, and we're I don't know if I'm expressing this well, but yeah.
No, I think that's fine. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that because you're often dealing with particularly in the dance work, you're dealing with 2 very specific trainings, and it's very, certainly, I guess when you began in the 1990s, it was very rare to find people who could juggle and dance, and there might be specialist jugglers with those dance skills, maybe more common in the classic circus, but certainly maybe not so in the subsidized sector. That actually you're bringing these, not only you bringing 2 forms together, often you're having to find people who are willing to engage or have those 2 disciplines in their body, because they're incredibly they need intensive training, both of them. It's all about repetition.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's been one of sometimes I get frustrated by it, in that ideally, I guess we have a school and we teach people to do the thing that we like doing. But also the nature of our work, in that we're doing a number of different, well, when there's not the virus around, a number of different shows which are different dancing disciplines or acting disciplines. So our school would be just so complicated because there would be so many different things. But in spring, and we have a phenomenal cast in that both the dancers and the jugglers did such a huge learning. I'm so in awe of them all. And then I guess I am fortunate in that my wife has got dancing in her bones, so she dances and juggles in her essence. And then Kim Huynh, who's been with the company for over a decade now, also did a lot of dancing as a little girl. I mean, they're these rare gems that have, I guess there's something you can't really, the absorption of dancing at a young age is so helpful. And like you say, it is difficult to find people who have the double skills, and we are getting more and more of them. Bizarrely, sometimes it's easier to go from the dance towards the juggling than from the juggling towards the dance.
Because I guess there's also what you say about dance and having that really kind of, I guess, that child experience of manipulating the body and thinking about the world as something that you move through and dance through. And is there the same thing for the juggler, that somebody who starts juggling at a young age, and it's because it's a way of juggling is a way of thinking of pattern.
So Spring has one of the special guests it has is Wes Peden, who is essentially an incarnation of juggling. I think you did a lovely talk with him at last year's Mime Festival. He is juggling personified. He grew up with juggling. He absolutely adores juggling. And interestingly enough, I think his journey being different to us in that I think he's happy in pure juggling. He's happy to add things in, but I would say his reflection on the form is in this pure, absolutely virtuosic and inventive choreographic juggling. But you really see in Wes, and there's a couple of his contemporaries, the fact that the juggling went into the body when they were little, that what you said, I really like, that dancers can think of the world as something that they move through. And I think Wes and his contemporaries can think of the world as something they throw things through. And
I think you see that in the edition of Spring where he's the guest star. It's a big shift in rhythm, in tone, in quality.
Yeah,
it's kind of like it's dropped in almost like as a. I'm trying to think of a culinary thing that you're having your meal and then you have something that then sets
having an Indian meal and all of a sudden there's a plate of spaghetti and then you're back.
And then you're on to something
else. And in
else.
fact, I do have. I mean, I absolutely adore Wes. For me, I can watch Wes all day. But theatrically, I had my doubts as to how I had used Wes in the piece, because Wes is so fantastic that he changes the way of looking at the show. So then I feel like it takes about 10 minutes after Wes has been on to go back to watching smaller detail. And because Wes can't help but be spectacular,
he's a boom.
And the boom maybe, and it's quite how you use that. And but then he is just such a fantastic boom that he comes in some of the earlier parts of Spring. He does this nice little elbow sequence within this dancing thing, and he lights it up. But
But I guess we're a bit back to that, the Bausch thing, aren't we? That the form is, but it's a bit different. The form holds the meaning. And here, actually, it's somebody who has such an established style that actually when you bring them in as a guest artist, you're bringing in, they're not coming in to do what you do. They're coming in to do what they do.
But then I think that Wes was trying to do what so it's interesting. It's that thing of, especially not necessarily in his club solo, where I feel like it's Wes, although Wes has so many tricks that Wes kind of went, these are the tricks that I think are right for Sean's show. And he's a meticulous maker. So he sent me so many videos saying, shall I put this trick in and shall we put that trick in? So in some of the earlier sections, Wes is actually learning some of our material, but then it's interesting how when you watch him, even when he's doing somebody else's material, I think it's something about his attack as well. I do feel like he has an extraordinary joy that I feel I see in people. Like I've been watching a lot for some reason, Keith Jarrett play the piano. And there's something about the attack. They sit at their instrument, and there's this incredible passion for the thing that just comes.
I think you see, I think once you, and maybe this is because I've seen so much of the work, but once you see the company, you realize that each individual juggler performer has their own style. You and Kati juggle in different ways. Zachary has his own tone. Kim has her own tone. And there's not a sense of, it's not like seeing a corps de ballet where essentially you're trying to erase the difference to find a kind of perfection. Here you actually have individuals with their own nuances who are joined by the patterns. And I think I guess that's what I find rewarding in returning, particularly to things like Smashed or to 4x4, or that you come back and you go, oh, actually, I can see humans, individuals within the work. And it's the humanity of those individuals that is part of the joy of watching it. That maybe goes back to the circus part, that I go to see people do amazing things, but actually the thing I like best at circus is when you see somebody, the old, oh, I'm going to fail for a couple of times before I do it on the third trick. It's that moment of seeing how somebody deals with the task rather than the task itself.
I think you're absolutely right, that letting people have their own identity. Ironically, though, one of our missions in spring, and Alex was very keen on this, and I feel like he succeeded, was that if somebody were to watch it for the first 10 minutes or so, they wouldn't be able to know who's a dancer and who's a juggler. So really blurring that line. And I guess there's extremes of that, whereas I feel like all the performers definitely blurred it. But there's moments like Tia's dancing at the beginning with the line of people counting to 100 with the rings. She so clearly is a dancer. And Wes in the middle, when Wes comes up and does a 5-club shower, it's clearly not a dancer who's learned that in... And I mean, actually, spring has elements of... Say again?
I was just saying, it's an interesting task then, isn't it? Can I perform as a juggler but look like a dancer? Can I but mask my jugglingness?
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of partly the task in spring. And I do feel like Alex succeeded in that. I mean, partly we had such a remarkable group of performers that learned so much and were so open to this. And it's something that I'm thinking very much now. We're making this piece that premieres in 22, which is Life, which is based on a mapping of Merce Cunningham's choreographic universe. And it is the most technical thing in terms of dancing and juggling that we have done. And so we are spending forever on the minutiae of how does this foot work and and hopefully we cross the lines even more.
Wow, that sounds great. We'll look forward to that. I think we're probably coming to the end of our time. So I guess it's just
quickly.
I think we should probably remind everyone that they can watch both Spring and Smashed on the Mind Festival's YouTube channel, and I think that's from the 18th to the 21st.
And I should say, we talked a lot about the special edition, but the special edition of Spring, it has 2 live drummers. They are really fantastic, and it has our friends Camerata Almaviva, with whom we've collaborated on 2 or 3 different shows, who actually also appear in the special version of Smashed. And so actually, I must say, Spring at Sadler's, that film, it just looks the best the show ever looked. Guy Hua lit it in a very subtle, layered way.
I think people should definitely check both of them out. They're both very interesting, and really, I guess they do stand as kind of marker points for me of where your work had got to at those moments in time. And of course, I hope and I'm sure that Life in 2022 will be another one of those marker points. But we'll see. Who knows what the work will be? So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure chatting with you, Thomas. You're so knowledgeable. You frame it better than I ever could.
You're very kind. It's always pleasurable chatting to you, because I can just set you off and you'll take us into very interesting places. So thanks to everyone for watching, and I think we should always sign off in these times with stay safe.
Yes,
and, keep other people safe, and we will see you all soon.